The classroom buzzed with excitement. Students chatted and laughed, their voices filling the air. It was the kind of day where everyone felt relaxed, except for one boy sitting quietly at the back, Jaden. He was a shy, polite black boy who often kept to himself. The teacher, Miss Harper, stood at the front of the class with a cold, authoritative expression. She had a reputation for being strict and sometimes unfair. Today, she had asked everyone to share what their parents did for a living. One by one, students proudly announced their parents' jobs. Doctors, business owners, engineers. Each answer met with a nod or a smile. But when it was Jaden's turn, the room grew quiet. Jaden took a deep breath and said confidently, "My dad is a pilot." For a brief second, there was silence. Then, Miss Harper let out a loud laugh. It wasn't the friendly kind, it was mocking. She shook her head, unable to hide her disbelief. "A pilot? Really?" she sneered. "Come on, Jaden. Let's be realistic." The class erupted into giggles. Jaden's face turned red as he looked down at his desk, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He wanted to speak up, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. Miss Harper's laughter echoed in his ears. Miss Harper crossed her arms, still smirking. She looked at Jaden with a mocking expression. "So, Jaden," she said in a sarcastic tone, "which airline does your dad fly for? Imagination Airways." The class laughed again. Jaden's hands clenched into fists under the desk. He took a deep breath and looked up. "He really is a pilot," he said softly but firmly. Miss Harper shook her head. "Maybe you should focus on something more believable," she replied with a chuckle. The other students whispered and pointed. Jaden felt the weight of their stares. His chest tightened, but he refused to cry. At recess, a few classmates approached him. "Why did you lie?" one of them asked. Jaden met their eyes calmly. "I didn't lie," he said. "You'll see." The day of the parent-teacher conference finally arrived. Parents filled the classroom, chatting among themselves. Ms. Harper stood confidently near the door, greeting parents with polite smiles. But every now and then, she glanced at Jaden. She was sure his father wouldn't show up. Jaden sat quietly in his seat, looking calm but determined. A few students whispered nearby, still convinced he had made everything up. Miss Harper chuckled softly, thinking about how she would handle the situation when no pilot appeared. As the minutes passed, more parents arrived, but there was no sign of Jaden's father. Miss Harper raised an eyebrow. "I knew it," she muttered under her breath. "All talk." But Jaden remained seated, eyes fixed on the door, waiting patiently. The tension in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Some parents glanced at their watches. Others whispered about the situation. Jaden could feel the weight of their stares, but he didn't move. He believed in his father. Suddenly the door opened. All heads turned at once. A tall, well-dressed black man in a crisp pilot's uniform stepped inside. The room fell completely silent. The sound of his polished shoes echoed with each step. He walked in confidently, his face calm but serious. Miss Harper froze. Her eyes widened as she stared at him. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Parents and students looked at each other in shock. Jaden stood up slowly. He smiled proudly. "That's my dad," he said softly, but his voice carried across the room. There was a long pause. Some students gasped. Others whispered in disbelief. A few clapped, but most were too stunned to react. Ms. Harper blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. She had been so sure Jaden was lying. Now, the truth stood right in front of her. The man in uniform walked over and placed a gentle hand on Jaden's shoulder. He turned to Miss Harper and said calmly, "I hear you doubted my son." The room was filled with tension. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Miss Harper looked down, her face turning red with embarrassment. She stammered, but the words came out broken and weak. I didn't mean to. The pilot looked around the room. His voice was calm but firm. Never judge someone by how they look. My son deserves respect, just like anyone else. The silence was heavy. The lesson was clear. No one in the room would forget this moment. Miss Harper's face turned pale. She looked around, but no one defended her. Parents whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disappointment. The students sat still, their eyes bouncing between Jaden's father and their teacher. The silence felt heavy. She swallowed hard and forced a nervous smile. I never meant to insult Jaden, she stammered. It was just unexpected. Jaden's father took a deep breath. His voice remained calm but firm. Unexpected? He raised an eyebrow. Or did you assume that a black boy could never have a successful father? Miss Harper had no words. She lowered her gaze. I didn't mean... But you did, Jaden's father interrupted. And you taught these kids that it's okay to judge someone based on their skin color. What lesson are you really teaching? The room stayed silent. Some students looked down, embarrassed. A few parents nodded in agreement. Miss Harper clenched her hands, realizing she had made a terrible mistake. Jaden, standing beside his father, felt something he hadn't felt before: pride. For once, he wasn't the one feeling small. He wasn't the one who had to explain himself. His father had spoken the truth, and everyone had heard it. The room stayed quiet as Jaden and his father walked out side by side. Jaden held his head high. For the first time, he felt proud of who he was and where he came from. He no longer cared about the whispers or the laughter from before. He had shown them the truth. Word spread quickly around the school. By the next day, everyone knew what had happened. Some students who once teased Jaden now looked at him with respect. A few even apologized. But Jaden didn't need their words. He had already learned something far more important. His worth didn't depend on their opinions. Miss Harper was called to the principal's office. After hearing what happened from several parents, she was suspended for her behavior. The school wanted to send a message. There was no place for discrimination. When Jaden returned to class, Miss Harper's seat was empty. But something felt different. The room felt lighter, warmer. Jaden smiled as he sat down. He had faced judgment, but he had also proved them wrong. Because in the end, the truth always comes out. And respect is earned by character, not color. Never judge someone by how they look. We all have stories, struggles, and strengths that others cannot see. Respect is not about skin color, background, or status. It is about character. Jaden was laughed at because of a false assumption. But the truth has a way of coming out. In the end, it wasn't just his father who walked into that room. It was a powerful lesson. A lesson that judging others says more about you than it does about them. We live in a world where kindness costs nothing, but prejudice can cost everything. Treat people with respect, no matter who they are. Because one day, the person you look down on might be the one who teaches you the most important lesson of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you love powerful stories with meaningful lessons, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. And remember, kindness always wins.